Hey y'all, it's Tom with npcrowd.com, and today we're going to talk about the 4 common types of org charts. This is a follow-up to our last video where we kind of walked through different nonprofit organizational structures. Now that you've decided on a structure, it's time to go ahead and put it on paper. And when we create an org structure, an org chart to represent an org structure, there's really 3 things that we want to accomplish. One is we want to visually represent the division of labor, who's going to be doing what. Secondly, we're going to be clarifying communications. That's both communications within a work team, it's communication across teams or across departments. We might just simplify it and say it should help clarify interdepartmental communications. The last thing that our org chart should do is to help align the functions that our organization has with the teams that are going to be accomplishing it in order to achieve our objectives. So a simpler way of saying that is our org chart is going to represent the alignment of departments across objectives. Now that we know what we're trying to accomplish with an org chart, we're going to talk about 4 types. The first type is going to be a vertical or hierarchical org chart. This is the one that you've seen dozens of times before. It represents a hierarchical organizational structure. And this type of org chart is really good about providing clarity around a chain of command. Who reports to whom, if there's a need to run things to a different department. Typically that goes back up the chain and then back down from peer leaders back down to their teams. It's easily understood because it's what most of us know best as far as organizational structure. But like we said in the last video, you'll see now visually how it starts to create silos. And so you have to be really careful that you're setting culture and communicating across those silos as you grow as an organization. Now, a flat org chart is similar to a hierarchical org chart, except you're going to find that it's very, very wide, not very deep. And so while this is really good at representing singular authority, it could also represent a lack of empowerment of teams if all decisions have to go back through that singular authority. And it may also demonstrate where this structure represented by this org chart might start to buckle because every manager, every leader that's identified, and again, there's going to be very few in a flat org chart, they can only say grace over so many direct reports. So the scope of management can be visually represented and seen where it's going to begin stretching too far. The third type of org chart is a matrix org chart, and this represents either a matrix or a cross-functional organizational structure. It is really good at providing clear accountabilities and communication, lines of communication, both vertically and horizontally. I really love the way that it's represented here in a matrix org chart. Representing that cross-functional set of teams and accountabilities in a matrix org chart also can really improve your interdepartmental communication because you're putting on paper the fact that everybody on a team, no matter which vertical department they're in, they should be communicating together. It's almost like you're giving them permission to cross departmental teams and lines, which is a good thing. But you can also see where you're going to have to communicate very clearly around supervision. So sometimes it's unclear whether I need to report to a supervisor horizontally or vertically, and typically vertically is where that needs to go. The last type of org chart that we're going to look at today is the circular org chart. And you can see here, it's kind of like an onion. Those of you who are fans of Shrek, it's like an onion. Different layers of responsibility and accountability. But those layers build on top of each other. Sometimes in a circular org chart, it's really good at showing that there can be communication across the whole, around the entire circle, but it can also be a little bit murky about the division of labor. And sometimes that type of an org chart may exaggerate the number of layers that someone needs to go through to get something done or to communicate an idea or a problem, perhaps, on a project they're working on. Now, within these 4 different types of org charts, I've got 5 tips for you when you're creating the org chart. The first and probably the most powerful tip that I can give you when creating the org chart is to use color and shading to represent either functions, departments, projects, whatever makes sense, rather than just the lines representing some type of a reporting relationship. Use colors to signify groupings. That will go a long way in helping tell a visual story about how the structure of your organization is supposed to work. Along with colors and shading, you can also use a limited number of symbols to highlight certain job functions, certain objectives, or project teams. Tip number 3 might sound like it contradicts tip number 2, but it doesn't. Tip number 3 is to limit the number of arrows and other symbology in the org chart. If you get too many symbols or you start to have arrows and lines going in all these different places beyond that most important reporting relationship, it begins to cause confusion, not provide clarity. So limit the number of arrows and symbols that you use. Tip number 4 is don't try and put the entire organization in one org chart. In a larger organization, you get things so small and they get so convoluted that it's really hard to tell the correct story. So you may create sub-org charts. So you've got one org chart that represents kind of the highest, most pulled out 10,000-foot view of the organization. And then for each of those boxes or circles or whatever shape you use, each of those maybe has a sub-org chart that goes into more detail. And so it gives you the ability to kind of drill into the right level of detail for whatever audience is looking at that org chart. So don't feel like you have to put everybody in the org chart on one sheet. Go ahead and break it out if you need to, where it makes sense. And then tip number 5 is just to use a variety of visualizations depending on your audience. For your board, it may make sense to use one type of an org chart at a certain level with certain colors, shading, and symbology. And when you present your org chart to line staff or program staff, perhaps, maybe a different type of org chart really helps provide the clarity that they need because of how they work. So don't be afraid to mix and match different types of org charts depending on the audience that you're serving. Again, hope that's been helpful. Until next time, be blessed, and we'll see you.